Hi, y'all. How's it going? Mic's working okay? You can hear me? Okay, great. So we went through a lot of different iterations of what we wanted to talk about, what we wanted to present. But one thing that kept coming up as, we discussed our different backgrounds was the presence and importance of storytelling in our families to pass down different lessons, pass down our culture. And so we wanted to each sort of tell our own short story today that relates to, white culture in some shape or form. And so the stories are important, but also the method of communication that we're choosing to distill those stories is just as important as us as well. And so Aaron did some workshop with like Moth, storyboard telling, and it's a type, and it was specifically focused around like activism and telling stories. And so we're following like the Moth storytelling method, which is essentially no notes, and it's got to be a true story. And so Erin's going to kick us off with her own story. Then Steve's going to go. Then I'm going to tell a story, and then Erin's going to bring us home.
Thanks, don't clap yet. All right. Good morning. What up, though? So growing up, white in Detroit, Detroit is an epicenter of culture. So I felt like I was surrounded by culture all the time, but I felt like none of it was mine. And I felt like I never really had a culture or belonged. When I was in all white spaces, I felt like I blended in, but I didn't belong or fit in. And when I was in the mostly black spaces in my neighborhood and my schools, I felt like I, was more comfortable, but also like this wasn't fully like my culture. I wasn't fully like accepted. And so I was just like a little bit of my experience growing up. It's just kind of feeling like surrounded by culture, but not really knowing like what is my culture, and feeling some grief around that, around like not feeling like I had any. And then when I was a little older, I ended up taking this class at EMU called Teaching for Social and Ecological Justice. The title got me, and I had an AmeriCorps award, so I was like, why not? And I just got fully into this world of this like eco-justice education, and it really challenged me because, like, again, growing up in Detroit in a working class like white family, to me the primary kind of social justice issues that were facing us were racial justice and economic justice. Like those are kind of, it's like hardcore, like that's what we got to fix. And then they started talking about environmental degradation, and they started talking about the relationship between like ethnocentrism and classism and sexism and ableism and all of these different kind of intersecting identities, as well as the degradation of our earth being kind of coming from the same culture of domination and being interrelated. And it really blew my mind up, and I pushed back a little bit. Like I was like, oh, I don't know, this is a little different, but it truly blew my mind up and became a home for me, and really I think spoke to how I was thinking about the world but didn't have the words for it yet. So then one day my mentor invited me to this elders and traditional peoples gathering that happens every year at Trent University, the First People's House of Learning in Peterborough, Ontario. You're not the only one that hasn't heard of Peterborough, Ontario. I hadn't heard of it either. But I went. I was like, really new in this space, felt called by this mentor, and I was like, absolutely, I'm going to say yes and go to this. And it's like a February weekend. It opens with a sunrise ceremony. So I'm in Northern Ontario. Oh, sorry. Okay. I don't want to shout. Okay, sorry. So yeah, we're in Northern Ontario. It's February weekend, sunrise ceremony, standing like shivering in a circle. Like everyone's going around and sharing like who they are and where they're from. And then everyone offers tobacco to the fire, and they like open the ceremony. And I'm hearing all of these people share like their family's name, their given name, their, different communities that they come from and identify with. And I was just like, I think I just identify as a Detroiter. Like I was like, I don't really know what I identify fully as other than my place, and not necessarily sure who my people are. And then we were sitting, so the whole weekend, they have a fire that goes in a teepee, and they have one designated elder who's in that teepee the whole time. And then they have fire keepers that stay overnight and keep the fire going. And so you can just kind of pop in throughout the weekend and sit there and just hear whatever teachings are being told, and like offer tobacco as thanks for those teachings. And so I'm sitting there, and this elder is like, sees me kind of feeling a little uncomfortable. Like, am I allowed to be here even? Like this is, just like not sure. And he's like, he starts telling the story of an Anishinaabe prophecy that says, and he was like, the reason we invite you all to this space, you meaning me, meaning white people, the reason why we allow you here right now is because of this prophecy that told us that you would all cause so much destruction to our way of life, to our earth, that around the turn of the century, we would have no choice but to show you the way and give you our teachings, because we know that our teachings are the way to actually save not only our earth, but us, ourselves. And that really, obviously touched me, made me feel more like purposeful of being there and invited there. And then he said, I actually feel worse for you in some ways. And I was like, why? And he's like, you're farthest removed from your actual ancestral knowledge than we are. Like we've had to undergo so much trauma, but we've held on to our language, to our knowledge, to our ways of being. You don't remember anything, do you? And I was like, no. And he's like, you need to remember, like you need to know and learn like who you are. And you need to find out where you're indigenous to, because everyone's indigenous somewhere. And everyone has been impacted by colonization in all these different ways. So that like was really sat with me, and I came home and I was like really weighing with this, like, I have to not only like know where I'm indigenous to, but I also need to know, how do I live here now on, Anishinaabe land, Wawatianog, like how do I live here in a Black city and like understand what are the teachings that I need to live here without destroying it and without causing harm. As much as possible. And so I started to kind of try and learn as much as I could about what are the stories about our river, about the animals that lived here, how people used to live here, and also going to events through the Wright Museum and other places around like traditional African knowledge. These are the people I live with. So I need to also know, their ways of thinking about the world. But I still was struggling with that challenge he offered me. Who are you? You need to remember. And I just truly, I knew I was Irish, but I was just like, what is Irish other than St. Patrick's Day and being Catholic and having a lot of kids and eating potatoes? Like, I knew all of those things, and all of those things are true. My mom's the oldest of 9. Like, we have everyone in our extended family has like 9 or 10 kids. It's all true. Tons of alcoholism. Can't even talk about that today. But part of that learning is also learning, maybe some of that alcoholism and trauma is this intergenerational trauma of colonization and how it impacted the island of Ireland. And then I joined Deal, and I think I was just like floating for a while. And then I joined Deal, and they were like, who are your ancestors? What have they done? And I really started to kind of try and explore that. And the other story I'll tell is one time on Facebook, I saw that my cousin was in Peterborough, Ontario. And I literally messaged him. I was like, what are you doing in Peterborough, Ontario? I had never heard of this town other than for this gathering. And I went to this gathering like 4 or 5 years before the pandemic. So I was going regularly. And he was like, I'm here doing genealogical research. Your ancestors moved here during the potato famine from Ireland. So this place that become this important gathering for me also was a place that was a refuge for my ancestors on one side of my family when they were escaping famine. And it all just kind of came together. And then I'm in Deal, and then that corresponds with an actual trip that was kind of a spontaneous, like, why not? Let's just go to Ireland, because my partner's friend was performing in a concert in Belfast, and I was like, let's go. And it was a really powerful trip, and that corresponding with Deal has really set me on this journey. And so, when we were in Ireland, I got to see my great grandfather's home. I got to go to the cemetery and the church they were baptized in. And then I went to another county where my other side of my family was from. I went to their church where they would have been baptized and lit candles. And And then I also went on a walking tour, like an Indigenous walking tour with some people that are trying really hard to get Irish people to connect to indigeneity, to understand the Irish place names, what the rivers were called, what the hills were called, what the towns were called, and to even see this impact. They've been colonized for so long that they don't even understand themselves as having any sort of indigeneity. And they've made relationships with the Maori, and they've made relationships with the Menominee. And he was telling stories of both interacting with both people, both them coming to Ireland and also them coming to Turtle Island, to Wisconsin, and having these encounters where the Irish people they brought with them are like, this sounds like what happened to us, you know, when they're hearing the story of what happened here. And then the Maori people saying, like, you know, this is what happened to you, you know, like really trying to get them to see like that they've been colonized. And so it's just been really interesting. So I've been listening to a lot of their podcasts, reading books, trying to understand, you know, what this history of colonization is in this country that is all white. Like these are white people that were also colonized by other white people. And so it's just really interesting. And I'm just trying to kind of connect with that part of me and with that people. And then thinking about political identity and intergenerational trauma that people don't talk about, you know, and learning that, you know, I've always grown up very passionate about justice, thinking that it was this fight for Detroit, for my place, against the racism that I saw here, against the ways that being in a Black space has also impacted my own, you know, I've experienced school closures, housing displacement, these other things, just being in this place. But then seeing, oh no, I have ancestors that were fighting British people, you know, that were like that were escaping, you know, so just trying to also see like that this political identity isn't just like me or my grandparents, like it goes farther back to this like kind of fight against colonization. And so I appreciate being a part of this journey, and it's just the beginning, so.
Alrighty, center stage. Okay, so my story is about change. Like that's the theme of my entire story, is going to be changing throughout the years, right? So let me take you back to like when I was being formed, right? Like when my brain was being, you know, molded into what it could be. It's high school, right? It's middle school, high school, right in that range. So I go from 8th grade, like I have these great memories of going up a whole middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, right? We were going to Frankenmuth every year before school started so I could get the hottest fashions, right? Tommy Hilfiger. Oh my gosh, I wouldn't wear it unless it had that stupid logo, right? And the bigger the logo, the cooler it was, right? You had to have them on your jeans, everywhere, right? So I was into it. So that's the start of this journey, right? So from there, I start, and let me paint another picture. Music in that era, right? I was a boy band fan, right? I was NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, pop music was my jam. I had frosted tips, right? As a redhead, that was weird, but I did it. Just to keep cool, right? I had that hairstyle where you combed it really far forward and then you smashed it up in the front, right? I had that one, like you ran into a wall. That was that was who I was, right? That was all of it. My music tastes, everything. I was rushing home watching TRL, right? Absolutely, you know. So, but at this time, I start meeting some new people. At this time, I've been going to school in one school, and they just built a new middle school. Right? So 2 years I was at East Middle School. And now this year I go to Discovery Middle School, this brand new middle school. I get there and I'm starting to meet some new people, right? And I meet this guy and we're talking and he's really cool, right? We just hit it off. We become friends. We're in chorus together, if you can believe that. I was a singer. Wasn't good. But that's how I got to know him, right? Because then we started talking about music. What kind of music do you like? And then he was like, I really like Nirvana. What, you know, I'm familiar with Smells Like Teen Spirit. Sure, I've heard that a couple times, but like, all right, let me listen to a whole album, right? And this guy's going on about how this dude's a poet, and oh my gosh, the lyrics that he's putting out there are just, just incredible, like speaking to his soul, right? And I'm like, well, I got to get a taste of this. So I did, right? I got a little taste of it, and then I got a little bit more of a taste of it. And I started changing, right? This is when this change starts happening. I'm meeting new people, I'm changing. I no longer go shopping at Frankenmuth, and my mom's, wallet's probably pretty happy about that, but she's disappointed because now, and I've got these photos, every single one of my school IDs, I go from button down, like Tommy Hilfiger, button down Oxford shirts, frosted tips, right? To Green Day, right? Blink 182. And she's like, your school pictures are ruined, right? She's used to me going to things and being her little guy, her little man, right? But now I'm going to homecoming dances, and I'm going to Goodwill beforehand and grabbing the nastiest corduroy suit that I could find and rocking that to homecoming, right? So I'm recognizing that, like, I'm pushing back against some of this stuff that I'm commercialism, like I'm starting to form these thoughts in my head, right? So then a lot of things start happening. In high school, freshman year, 9/11 happens, right? So 9/11, towers hit, and I'm in a mostly white community. But we do have a large South Asian community that has moved in due to the engineering opportunities in the auto industry, right? So I'm now recognizing that I'm now reckoning living in a world where I'm starting to discover counterculture, right? Starting to discover this idea that there's something else out there. And then I end up hitting the idea that I don't have to be patriotic. I don't have to be. Like, I'm seeing these people after 9/11 with the flags everywhere, blatant racism, right? And I'm thinking, I don't want that. That's not the vibe I'm putting out there in the world, right? So I'm starting to form these things. I'm changing. I'm figuring this stuff out. I'm listening to bands like Anti-Flag, which, if you don't know, not very patriotic band, right? But what pushed me there is because of all the flags that I was seeing. Oh, this band's called Anti-Flag. Hey, I'll be Anti-Flag too. Let's listen. Let's go, right? So I'm 16, 17, 18 years old. I almost got in a fight at a Tigers game because I didn't stand for the national anthem, and somebody really took that offensive. So like, I'm discovering there's an antithesis to this stuff. There's a different way to think, right? So my teacher ends up running for Congress when I'm in high school. He runs as a Green Party candidate. So it's just like it's a ploy, right? But it gets us interested in running for office, figuring out what this could look like, knocking doors for the campaign, right? Doing phone banks, volunteering. This all gets me like really jazzed up. I'm really excited about this because I'm starting into this punk rock music phase, right? I'm starting to learn about, we have a president, George W. Bush, who's Jr., George Bush Jr., who's not doing like, he's very problematic in a lot of ways, right? We see the response after 9/11, right? But I'm going deeper into this. I'm going deeper into like, why was his mission accomplished banner problematic, right? And I'm thinking beyond these things because I've got that counterculture like in me, right? I'm thinking through things at a very young age. I'm reading Karl Marx in between making sandwiches at Subway. Like, I had make your sub, and then I would go back and read my book, you know? So like, so this is all part of this process. Now we're going to fast forward a little bit because I'm the first in my family to go to college. First generation college student, right? George W. Bush is still president, unfortunately, but the economy collapses. Just flat out under the ground, right? Housing market collapses. People are scrambling. The fear that was in that era, right? Like, oh my God, our homes are getting foreclosed on, which isn't a problem so much, or isn't a rarity so much in low income or low income communities, right? We'll just say that. But when it starts affecting the suburbs, right, and it starts affecting houses on golf courses that were formerly owned by doctors or accountants who were leveraged to the hilt with their mortgage and everything, right? People started getting really, really scared. And around this time, the Tea Party starts riling up, right? Because they're trying to make sense of people's pain. I'm of that counterculture mindset, right? So I see these people getting sucked into this. I see my family, I see my friends like getting sucked into this ideology, and I push back against it. And I become a conscientious objector, right? Now I'm in college and my family has to move. My dad no longer has a job because of George W. Bush's policies. So I join, like, I'm fired up. I'm gonna uproot the system, right? I'm gonna be that guy who joins the Democratic Party and then like just turns it around. I didn't. I flamed out, right? I burned out because I was trying to do things that they were not interested in doing. I wanted to have real conversations. I wanted to win races for people that actually, have lived experiences, not just anointed candidates through stuff. So this is changing in me again, right? I think I know what I want to do. I want to do politics. I have to do politics. This stuff has affected my life immediately, like in a very real way, and I need to do this. So I'm running through all this stuff, and I end up burning out of the Democratic Party. I can't work with them anymore, right? So I end up working for a labor union. I come from a labor union family. This is the pinnacle of what I wanted to do. Workers' power, right? Collective action, organized people, organized money. Again, we didn't see eye to eye on this stuff, right? It was a very corporate culture. I didn't feel like I was really affecting change in the way that I needed to. So in 2020, I dip out and I say, all right, my last day, February 28th, 2020. I don't have a plan. I just know I have to do something. Like I'm feeling this change in me, right? Like no longer is it just organized labor that I need to be fighting for. I've been awakened in a lot of ways into the people and the relationships that I've built. And now I need to start thinking about racial equity into this stuff, right? And labor unions are problematic in that respect in a lot of ways. So I say, I'm leaving it. February 28th, 2020. No plan. Just going to leave it. See what happens. This is the greatest election in our life. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to jump on an election, a campaign. We're going to make it happen. 2 weeks later, the whole world shuts down, right? A couple weeks later, George Floyd gets murdered. Now I find myself, I know my North Star, right? Another thing has happened. 9/11 changed me. George Floyd changed me again. Because now I recognize my racial stake in this, our racial stake in this, right? Like our co-liberation in this. I'm no longer looking at my whiteness as just something that exists in me, outside of me. Now I'm recognizing that I have a role to play in this, and I need to. So I found the current organization I'm working for, Michigan United. And since then, my eyes have been opened in a million different ways. But they sent me to week-long camp. So I'm at week-long organizer summer camp is what we called it. We're there, and I get challenged with an agitation. How has white supremacy harmed you? And I still didn't have an answer. I fumbled on it. It made school easy for me, right? But that wasn't enough. Like that's a lame answer. I could screw around, but I wouldn't get kicked out of class. Like I felt like that was a white privilege that I had in that. But that's not it, right? So I left that night after being agitated through that question, and I wrote a list. I did research. I wrote a list. I've continued to update that list. I've continued to think through that list. That list has led me here to this spot because I've done that introspection. I've done that thinking. and I'm ready to be in community with others to change the world to change, right? To usher in a new change. So there you go.
So the first job I ever worked was at an apple orchard. It's about 10, 15 minutes from my house. My family and I all worked there together on the weekends. I also started working there at the same time as my friend, who's also my neighbor at the time. He'd worked there for the last 20 years until he passed away this year from brain cancer. And so I've been reflecting a lot on my time, with him, my relationship, but also like my time at the apple orchard, and sort of what that meant to me over these last few months. So I wanted to like share a story from my time there. And a lot of these reflections, I think there's been three things that have sort of come up for me. One, this really was like a grounding space for me and my family. It really was like a cultural grounding, especially in the fall. We were there all the time. We were, working with other folks in the community. We were further connecting to land, and I really enjoyed it. Two, apples are not indigenous to Virginia. They're not indigenous to this country. So there's a lot to unpack there as well, especially with it becoming a big part of like our cultural, like identity. And three, like the class difference between the different white folks who were there was really prevalent and very like real. I could feel it from a young age. I remember we would have to check everyone's car when they left. You had a lot of like upper middle class, general middle class white folks coming from the suburbs and from the city to the orchard on the weekends, and they'd often try to leave without paying for the apples that they took. And so we have to check their cars. And there was one woman who had this really puffy, big dress. And we had to ask her to like shift the dress a little bit so we could see under the seat. And she was probably hiding 100, 150 apples like under her dress. Nice car, was able to take 2 hours to drive to rural Virginia to come take some apples. So she could afford it. And I think the last like 10, 15 years with like the further commercialization of fall, like the pumpkin spicification of fall. I think like an annual weekend trip to the apple orchards has become another part of like upper middle class white culture in a really, I think, weird way. I think people put on their flannels, they take a picture of them pulling an apple from the tree, they post it on Instagram, they buy way more apples than they're going to be able to consume, they end up throwing out. And I think with that too, there's a lack of acknowledgement of the fact that most of like apple orchard work in this country is done by migrant workers. There's a lot of like precarity in that work, like tied to immigration status. There's no acknowledgement of that. It kind of comes off to me as like, we want to cosplay as like working class, we want to cosplay as a farm worker. And that's part of the culture in a really like uncomfortable way. And I think I wanted to share like this specific example because I think in general, like white people, we have a real tendency to appropriate and overconsume other folks' cultures. Specifically, I think I see it show up the most with like Black culture. And this example to me also shows, we do it with our own cultures as well. And we lose a lot when we do that. And it's not something I was really thinking about until I started reflecting over it these last few months. And I think a lot of that comes from, I think, Aaron's point about being further removed from, our indigenous roots, Jason's point about the further like consumerism in those like mega malls. I think it like provides us a sort of entitlement to overconsume and take. And yeah, I just wanted to share an example that, we're doing it to ourselves as well. And we lose a lot when we do that. And so I used to be really proud, be able to take folks to the orchard that I worked at, introduce them to my friends, introduce them to folks who like raised me. And now it kind of feels like it veers more into like white nonsense a little bit with like that fall trip. And yeah, I think it's just disappointing, but also, wanted to be honest about, my experience, how it's shaped me and how it's also, changing, and also acknowledge that, we do it to everyone else all the time too. Yeah, so thank you.
All right, thanks. Give it up for our storytellers. Pretending I'm a host. Cool. So just to wrap us up, a few kind of themes and things in response to like the questions that we were asked around like what freedom means to us. Few themes is really, especially as people, like diasporic people, as settlers, like it's very important to understand or try your best, knowing that we can never fully understand, we can never fully consume all of the knowledge we need to live in a place like fully without harming it, and fully understanding it. That's not how knowledge works. It's always going to be beyond us, but to at least try to understand not only the knowledge, the teachings of the place that you live, the indigenous teachings of that place, but also the people who live there now, and also your own people. So trying to see this as like there, when we talk about like rematriation, like for me, that's like, how do I live where I am now in a way that both is with care, with intention, and encompassing all these different kinds of knowledge. And the other thing is that thinking of whiteness as the absence of culture reifies racism. It creates this like idea that like, well, this is the blank slate, this is the one, and then everything else is the other. Every other culture is what can be studied and analyzed. Whiteness itself is a culture. It needs to be studied and analyzed, especially how dominant culture and domination harms everyone involved in domination, as Swana Petty was teaching us. And really to understand that helps us move from being these like white saviors or these allies and in solidarity, and actually towards co-conspirators, co-liberation. And seeing this as a system that has harmed and has like created these realities for everyone, but seeing the system rather than just like the people helps us kind of understand how it's impacted us, but also like how to kind of shift that. That this isn't natural. This isn't just like the way things are. And then when we were asked what freedom means, of course, as white people, we cringed because, everyone's heard a country song or thought freedom isn't free and all that crap. And so for us, it's like, I want people to talk less in white culture about freedom and more about responsibility. To me, freedom in white culture brings up notions of detachment, of having no limits, of having no responsibility, of being left alone, when really what we know is we need each other to survive. We need to not be alone. We need to be connected, grounded, not detached, not floating off like these isolated little islands. Like that's not how we survive. We're obviously seeing that in really tragic ways play out in our climate crisis right now. And so yeah, freedom means moving beyond this idea of detachment and of individualism towards interdependence. What does it take to nurture the relationships that exist between us and also between us and our ecosystems? And what the spaces in between those relationships are what need care and what need nurturing. So that to me is what freedom looks like, and what white culture needs to move into in terms of understanding freedom. Thank you, everyone.